Greetings, friends. Imagine the endless steppes. Thousands of years ago, mysterious tribes wandered these lands. They left behind majestic burial mounds, known as kurgans, which still hold the secrets of the past today. This was the Yamna culture. It was one of the most influential archaeological communities of the early Bronze Age. In this video, we will dive into the world of the Yamna people. We will explore their way of life, their beliefs, and their incredible migrations. Most importantly for us, we will examine in detail the mark the Yamna culture left on the lands of modern Europe. We will see how it is connected to our history and origins. Are you ready for an exciting journey through millennia? Well then, let's begin. More than 5,000 years ago, a civilization spread across these lands in the endless steppes between the Dniester and the Urals. It left behind thousands of silent witnesses, the kurgans. This is the Yamna culture, also known as the pit grave culture or the ochre grave culture. It existed approximately from 3,300 to 2300 BC. It covered a huge territory of the Pontic-Caspian steppe. Its defining feature was the method of burying the dead. Usually, the deceased were placed on their backs in a reclined position with bent knees. They were then sprinkled with red ochre. The bodies lay in simple pits under majestic earthen mounds called kurgans. But as they say, it wasn't just about the graves. The Yamna culture was primarily a society that was the first to widely master wheeled transport. This unprecedented mobility changed the Eurasian landscape. Their language is also closely linked to the origin and spread of Indo-European languages. This is the language family spoken by almost half of humanity today. But where did this culture originate? Where did its people come from? What role did the land we know today as Ukraine play in this grand story? Modern research provides amazing answers that force us to reconsider outdated ideas. It must be said immediately that the Yamna culture did not emerge from nothing. It formed on the basis of previous Neolithic communities living in the Pontic-Caspian steppe. The question of its specific origin was a subject of debate for a long time. Traditional models often pointed to the Volga region and the Khvalynsk culture as the main center of its formation. However, more and more evidence is emerging. Archaeological and genetic data point to the territory of modern Ukraine as one of the key centers or even the cradle of the Yamna culture. For instance, the prominent Ukrainian historian and archaeologist Mikhailo Yuryovich Videyko points out a key predecessor. He identifies the Seredny steppe culture as the primary precursor. It existed on the territory of Ukraine, approximately from 4,500 to 3,500 BC. Both cultures practiced semi-nomadic pastoralism. Furthermore, representatives of the Seredny steppe culture buried their dead in ground graves and sprinkled the bodies with ochre. This practice brings them very close to the later Yamna culture. I don't want to scare you or myself with difficult words like cluster or steppe component. So, let me simplify things a bit. Imagine that scientists are like detectives investigating the DNA of very ancient people. Thanks to these studies, we have learned a lot in recent years. We now know that the Yamna people did not appear out of nowhere. Their ancestors were the people of the Seredny steppe culture. They lived on the territory of modern Ukraine even before the Yamna period. Where did the Seredny steppe people come from? Their genetic footprint shows they were a mixture of two different groups. One group was ancient hunters who lived in Eastern Europe. The other group consisted of people who came from the Caucasus Mountains region. It turns out that this mixture began to form east of Ukraine. This likely happened near the Volga River and the North Caucasus about 7,000 years ago. However, the most important stage of this mixing occurred later. It directly led to the appearance of the Yamna people. This happened exactly when people with that Caucasian genetics came to the territory of Ukraine. They mixed with the local hunters who were already living here. This is how the Seredny steppe culture was formed, which then grew into the Yamna culture. To put it very simply, DNA scientists found that Yamna people are descendants of the Seredny steppe culture from Ukraine. The Seredny steppe people themselves were a mix of local ancient hunters and people from the east. But the key mixing that gave birth to the Yamna culture in Ukraine took place precisely on Ukrainian lands. The multi-layered site of Mikhailivka is of exceptional importance for the theory that the Kherson steppe is the homeland of the Yamna culture. It was here that the remains of an individual with the oldest genetic profile of a Yamna representative were found. These remains are dated to approximately 3,400 BC. Therefore, in my opinion, two factors disprove the previously dominant theory of an Eastern origin. First is the fact that the largest concentration of Kurgans is found in the northern Black Sea region. Second is the clear connection between the Yamna and Seredni steppe peoples. This suggests they did not simply migrate from the east to the west as a fully formed culture. The economy of the Yamna culture was based mainly on cattle breeding. This was supplemented by hunting, fishing, and gathering. The breeding of cattle, sheep, and horses played a leading role. Horse bones are found both in settlements and in burials. Wheeled transport was critically important for their mobility. They used 2- and 4-wheeled wagons pulled by oxen. The use of wheeled transport is confirmed by findings of wagon remains in burials and their images. There is also evidence of horse riding. However, its prevalence and time of appearance are still subjects of scientific debate. As I mentioned, the Yamna people were mostly nomads or semi-nomads. Instead of large hill forts like the Trypillians, their settlements were often temporary camps. These consisted of tents, light ground structures, or semi-dugouts. Examples of these were discovered at the Novosilicia settlement. Despite the lack of a clear structure, scientists suggest it was a camp for grazing livestock. However, larger and sometimes even fortified settlements appeared later. This happened especially in the lower and middle Dnieper regions, such as at Dysyatina. This may indicate a transition to a more sedentary lifestyle in some regions. As for agriculture, it clearly played a secondary role. However, the cultivation of millet, and possibly wheat and barley, was still practiced near rivers or temporary camps. In everyday life, the Yamna people mostly used tools made of stone and bone. Gradually, however, metallurgy began to develop. Metal was rare in the early stages. Later, a local center of metalworking appeared. It possibly used ores from the Donets Basin. The Yamna people worked with arsenical bronze. They produced axes, knives, and awls daggers. At the same time, they were open to external influences. They borrowed technologies and product types from the more developed Makop metallurgy. They also imported Makop products through the Chemioba culture. It must be said that the Yamna culture was not uniform across its vast territory. Its initial cultural complex was not static. It actively adapted and modified through interaction with various local natural conditions and existing cultures. For example, the transition to a sedentary lifestyle in the lower Dnieper could have resulted from interaction with late Trypillian traditions. It might also reflect the use of different ecological opportunities compared to the open steppe. The appearance of specific ceramic forms, such as censers, in the lower Dnieper confirms local innovations. It also shows the influence of neighbors like the Chemioba culture. Thus, the Yamna culture developed dynamically. It integrated local elements and adapted to regional contexts throughout its long existence of about 1,500 years. Regarding the social structure, we need to look closely, or rather, dig deeper into the Kurgans. The Trypillian culture is studied mainly through the remains of large settlements. In contrast, the main source of information about the Yamna people is their burials. The unified burial rite across vast territories allows us to identify the Yamna culture as a single cultural and historical community. Kurgans were not just graves. They were complex structures that required collective effort to build. They likely had a sacred meaning. They served as places of memory and ritual. A kurgan could contain a primary burial as well as many secondary ones added later. The bodies were buried in pits. At first, these were simple rectangular or oval pits. Later, pits with a ledge appeared. Sometimes, the graves were covered with wood or stone. The dominant position was reclining on the back with bent knees. In the early stages, the head was usually oriented to the east. Over time, burials on the side and western orientations appeared. In general, the orientation became less stable. Red ochre was used very widely, especially in the early stages. Burial goods were generally not very rich. They could include ceramic vessels, stone or metal tools, and weapons. Animal bones are also often found. These can be interpreted as evidence of sacrifices. In some clearly elite burials, the remains of wagons are found. Stone anthropomorphic stelae were sometimes placed over the kurgans. These might have depicted ancestors or chiefs. Interestingly, the Yamna people could reuse stelae from previous cultures, such as the Chemioba. It should be added that most burials are male. Therefore, we can assume that the Yamna people had a patriarchy. Researchers Trotman, Ramp and Kilyuka put forward a hypothesis about a culture of confrontation inherent to the Yamna people. This was based on competition, individualism, and the demonstration of strength. This stands in contrast to the culture of consensus, typical of the Neolithic farmers of Europe. This cultural difference was combined with technological advantages, such as mobility from horses and wagons. There were also biological factors. The Yamna people were taller and had immunity to certain diseases. All of this together could have contributed to their successful expansion to both the west and the east. And as we will see, things are not as simple as previously thought. The migration of the Yamna culture was one of the largest demographic and cultural phenomena of prehistoric Europe. It left a deep mark on the genetic and linguistic landscape of the continent. Migration flows moved in several main directions. To the west was one of the most powerful vectors of expansion. Yamna groups moved into the Danube Valley. Later, their influence and genetic heritage spread to Central and Northern Europe. These processes are closely linked to the formation of the corded ware culture, and partly, the bell beaker culture. Another significant migration flow was directed to the east, toward the Altai and southern Siberia. Here, the Afanasyevo culture was formed based on migrants from the steppes. Its population is genetically almost impossible to distinguish from the Yamna people of the Pontic-Caspian region. There is also evidence of possible Yamna influences on the Caucasus and adjacent territories. However, this direction is less studied, and the nature of interactions there could have been completely different. You might ask, why didn't they stay at home? There are many theories, as always, but I would highlight a few main reasons. One is climate. There are hypotheses that the climate in the steppe zone became very dry at the end of the 4th and the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC. This could have been a catalyst for migration. It forced pastoralist groups to seek new territories richer in water and pastures. I would also highlight demographics. After a period of formation from a relatively small population, the Yamna people likely experienced a real demographic explosion. This created additional pressure and incentive to expand into new territories. But the most interesting theory to me is the frontier theory. This is developed by researchers Ivanova and Anikin. This theory emphasizes economic factors, primarily trade, as the dominant force behind cultural and historical processes. Traditional models emphasized military conquests. In contrast, these researchers identified two types of frontiers relevant to the northwestern Black Sea and the Balkan-Carpathian region. One is the pastoral frontier in the southwest, related to the development of new pastures. The other is the trade frontier in the Balkan-Carpathian region, focused on the exchange of goods and resources. The Budjak culture played a special role in these processes. It was located in the steppes of the northwestern Black Sea region. It is seen as an important mediator in trade and cultural ties between the steppe world and the populations of the Balkan-Carpathian region and Central Europe. Budjak burials contain concentrations of silver and copper artifacts and imported ceramics. They also show evidence of local metalworking, using metal from Thracian deposits. All of this points to active Western contacts. The frontier theory can be especially useful for explaining the spread of Yamna influence in regions without mass genetic replacement. This was the case in some areas, unlike the corded ware culture. This suggests that Yamna ideology and cultural practices could spread through zones of intense cultural and economic exchange. It wasn't only through direct colonization. This complements, rather than contradicts, the model of mass migrations to other regions where the genetic impact was more pronounced. The nature of Yamna interaction with the indigenous population varied significantly from region to region. In some cases, like with the corded ware culture, there was significant genetic replacement of the local population by the incoming steppe component. In others, like with the Makop culture, cultural influence and technology exchange prevailed while genetic mixing was limited. This demonstrates the flexibility of the Yamna strategy. It shows the different nature of the frontiers formed in different directions of their expansion. Yamna migrations were not just a mechanical movement of people. It was a complex, multifaceted process. It included the spread of technological innovations like metallurgy and transport. It also involved the transformation of social structures and the spread of a new ideological complex reflected in burial rites. These factors acted together to enable and stimulate expansion. It was not just a flight from unfavorable conditions. Rather, it was a dynamic process of developing new territories and spreading a new, effective way of life. One of the most important aspects of the Yamna legacy is its close connection with the spread of Indo-European languages. It is also linked to the formation of many Indo-European peoples. The vast majority of modern researchers agree on one point. The carriers of the Yamna culture spoke a form of the late Proto-Indo-European language. The large-scale migrations of the Yamna people led to the spread of their genetic component across vast areas of Europe and Asia. This component can still be traced today in the gene pool of many modern European peoples. These migrations are often associated with the spread of Y chromosome haplogroups, particularly R1b and R1a. These are dominant in many Indo-European speaking populations. The study of the Yamna culture, especially from the standpoint of modern Ukrainian science, shows a complex picture. It was one of the most influential communities of ancient Eurasia. The analysis of archaeological and paleogenetic data allows us to draw several key conclusions. First, the thesis of the heterogeneity of the Yamna cultural and historical community is confirmed. They had a unified burial rite, which acts as the main marker of the culture and indicates a shared ideology. However, the material culture and anthropological types of the population show significant regional variation. This challenges the idea of a Yamna people as a monolithic ethnic unit. Instead, it points to a complex process of integrating different groups under a new worldview system. Second, modern Ukrainian researchers rely on archaeological finds and the latest genetic data. They argue that the northern Black Sea region was one of the key, if not the central, regions for the formation of the Yamna culture. This challenges traditional models that placed its origin exclusively in the Volga rural region. Third, special attention is paid to the role of local Neolithic cultures in forming the Yamna phenomenon. This includes the specifics of regional variants like the Bujak culture. This culture is seen as an important factor in spreading Yamna influence to the west. At the same time, the mechanisms of spread are interpreted not only as migrations or conquests. They are also seen through the lens of economic interests and trade interaction, particularly within the frontier theory. This culture remains more than just an important object of scientific research. It is an integral part of the deep historical heritage of Ukraine. It is fundamental to understanding the origins of modern European peoples. So there it is. Friends, thank you for watching this video to the end. The topic is difficult to grasp, but I tried my best. If you liked it, please give it a like and subscribe. All the best.